Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. Today's video is all about the Shroud and the changes I want to see in the raid when it goes epic. First of all, the developers who made the Shroud did it right, so I don't want much to change. The Shroud is the most loved raid in DDO's history, and it's definitely the most successful raid in DDO's history and the most run. I do think there are tweaks that can improve it for Epic, but like I've said, I only want to see minor changes made to freshen the raid up. I don't want to see any major revamps. The only part of the raid that could perhaps be an exception is part 1. This, I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say that this is the least popular part of the raid, because it's a bit of a time suck and there's not really any chance of failing. It's just mindless portal beatdowns for the most part. So I'd like to see that addressed. Instead of static portals, I'd like to see a wide range of random encounters like red names and a big variety of mobs. Instead of having the portal spawn, have groups of mobs perhaps with a red name in there randomly spawn instead of portals, and have the party be required to kill those mobs instead of just sit there, auto attack and AFK and beat on some portal with inflated hit points. I want lots and lots of variety here with the mini bosses and the mobs that come up in this part. I want it to give the raid a different feel every time you enter it. I want the mini bosses especially to have a wide variety of attacks. Maybe some can be focused on crowd control. Maybe they can annoy your party by dancing you or holding you. Maybe other mini bosses can put out big damage spikes. Maybe some mini bosses are specialized in certain elements. Just give us a large, maybe some throw out insta-kill spells. Just give us a big variety of mobs so we don't know what to expect, and so we get a different experience every time we go into this part. This will help keep the raid fresh, and it's much more interesting than just beating on portals that don't move. I'd also like to see perhaps more traps thrown in. I always thought the spike traps were a little interesting in part 1. Perhaps throw maybe some random sporadic traps or some more lava pits or something that would make it just a little bit more interesting, make you have to pay attention a little more in that area. Let's move on to part 2. Now part 2 I love. I think everything for the most part should stay the same. It's a great concept. It requires teamwork. Having to split up the mobs is a great mechanic. I would, however, like to see a completely new set of mini bosses in this section, just for the purposes of freshening it up. I don't want the raid to seem tired when we enter it for Epic. Give us a completely new set of mini bosses, but keep the concept and the mechanic in this section the same. Also, not just this section, but the whole raid, I want to see cosmetic improvements to the terrain. The Epic version should feel epic. They should update it to give us those storm horns like graphics that we've seen in the recent years, rather than just revamp the graphics we have in the Shroud currently. Part 3, also, I don't want any major changes. This is a great section. The puzzles are great. I love this mechanic in this raid. It's so much better, and it's what the big problem with Deathworm is currently. Deathworm gave us a few large puzzles that only 1 or 2 party members can work on at a time, and that gives everyone else nothing to do. But the Shroud did it right. With the Shroud, everyone has their own individual puzzle. This gives everyone something to do. So I want the mechanic to stay that way. I want the party members to be split up and portaled into the rooms just like they are now. However, because we've all done, not all, but most players have done, or many players have done the puzzles hundreds of times, I would like to see those tweaked a bit. Perhaps instead of a light puzzle, maybe give us a tile puzzle instead, or maybe a lever puzzle, something like that. Just give us a different kind of puzzle, but don't give us a puzzle that's any more difficult or any easier, or one that takes any more time to complete. Just perhaps mix it up with a tile puzzle or a lever puzzle instead of the light puzzles, just to freshen the raid up, because we've all done those light puzzles 100 times. But keep everything else the same. The wall concept, keep that the same. This is a great section. I really like this part of the raid. I don't want to see any huge changes. Let's move on to parts 4 and 5. And these are the sections where you fight the bosses. I don't want to see any changes here either. Just mix up the trash mobs a bit so that they're not the same. Perhaps instead of gnolls in part 4, give us something else, some other kind of mob. Really, it could be a lot of things. Perhaps even give us a random selection of mobs so it's not the same every time. I want variety. I want the raid to have a different feel every time we enter it. But the boss fights themselves, I don't want to see any major changes, because people love these boss fights. They've been a huge success in the game, and fighting Eritricos is a classic part of DDO, and that should definitely not change for Epic. The developers have mentioned that they are planning on adding an extra encounter to the end of the raid after part 5, so there apparently will be a part 6. I'm not necessarily against this or for it. I don't have enough information, but I hope that they consider the time of the raid and the length of the raid. I'm a bit afraid that it's going to make the raid too long. In my opinion, 30 to 45 minutes is the perfect length for a raid, and I thought that the original Shroud hit this on the mark. Nowadays you can run it much faster than this, but when cap was 20, this was about the length of time it took people to run this raid, and I thought that was perfect. A raid like Mark of Death is way too short, but a raid like Caught in the Web is too long. 30 to 45 minutes is the perfect threshold, and if they add a long extra encounter to the end, it's really going to push Shroud towards the 1 hour mark on the average completion time, and I don't like that. I think that's too long. If they really want to add a new boss fight, they should probably consider removing part 4 or part 5. I'm assuming that this new part 6 is going to be a boss fight. Maybe not. I'm assuming, since it's going to be the last part in the raid, that it's going to be another boss fight. And if they add this part on as a part 6, that means we're going to have part 4, which is a boss fight, part 5, which is a boss fight, and then part 6, which is another boss fight. This might have the same problem that Deathworm had, in that it's going to be redundant and repetitive. Just like the Deathworm mirror puzzles, it's going to be redundant and repetitive if we have 3 boss fights in a row. Fighting Harry twice and then fighting him for a 3rd time in part 6, or fighting another big demon boss for part 6, is just too much of the same thing, and I hope that the developers keep that in mind when they're designing this section of the raid. So overall, don't want to see any major changes to the Shroud. It's a very successful raid, the most successful in DDO's history. People love it. Don't fix something that's not broken. Let's focus on minor tweaks and cosmetic changes that can help freshen the raid up without taking away from the core feel and theme of the raid that people love so much. So until next time, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe and tell your DDO friends and guildies about my channel. Thanks for watching.